What holds a man over the abyss? One nylon strap and a steel carabiner. Imagine the heat. You are leaning out of a Huey, hovering a few dozen feet above the emerald carpet of the Vietnamese jungle. The air at 100 miles per hour doesn't just blow, it punches. It screams past your ears, drowning out the rhythmic thunder of the main rotor. One sharp bank to the left, the pilot pulls the stick. Centrifugal force grabs your chest and shoves. Suddenly, your boots are dangling over nothingness. There is no floor, only 2,000 feet of empty space and a blur of tropical trees below. 90% of the mission is soul-crushing boredom. You stare at the green silence until your eyes ache. Then, the other 10% hits. Pure horror. How do you stay inside? Most gunners ignored the standard lap belts. They were useless. They felt like something out of a civilian car. Instead, they used the monkey harness, a heavy nylon strap wrapped around the torso, a single line anchored to the cabin floor. It was a deal with the devil. The harness allowed you to lean out, to find the perfect firing angle, to hang your body into the wind. But it didn't strictly keep you inside. If the helicopter took a hit and spiraled, the force could shot put you through the open door. You wouldn't just fall, you would be launched. The monkey harness was designed for one nightmare scenario, to keep you dangling in the slipstream, bouncing against the fuselage, while your crew fought to haul your weight back into the vibrating metal ribcage of the machine. You would hang there, spinning in the wash of the blades, waiting for hands to reach out. 100 miles per hour, one nylon cord, one long minute of hanging above the canopy. They performed a lethal acrobatics act on machines that were never supposed to see combat. The Pentagon saw the helicopter as a flying taxi, a simple cargo truck with rotors. No guns, no armor. Just a pilot, a co-pilot, and a crew chief moving crates and men through the sky. Command assumed speed and height were enough to stay safe. They were wrong. The jungle didn't care about air mobility. Small arms fire turned these aluminum shells into colanders before the wheels even touched the grass. It was a systemic collapse of an entire military doctrine. What happens when your transport becomes a target? You improvise. You bolt a machine gun to a swivel and pray. The role of the door gunner wasn't a planned specialty. It was a desperate reaction to a rising body count. The numbers tell the story better than the generals. The United States lost 7,000 helicopters during the conflict. That is more than the total aircraft losses in many major 20th century wars. By the end, 50% of all deployed helicopters crashed. In a falling helicopter, instruments shielded the pilots. The door gunner in the open hatch had nothing. Bullets did not just hit the Huey, they passed through it. The aircraft's skin was a thin sheet of aluminum, barely thicker than a soda can. Imagine the view from the jump seat. You look down. Between your boots, jagged holes appear in the floor. Through those holes, you see the green blur of the jungle floor rushing by at 100 knots. Why wear armor if it cannot stop a bullet? That was the question every gunner asked. The military issued flak jackets. They were heavy. They trapped the swamp heat until a man's flight suit was soaked in sweat. But against a Soviet-made AK-47, they were tissue paper. A 7.62 millimeter round from a Kalashnikov shreds a standard flak jacket at 300 meters. Official manuals called the heavy ceramic inserts small arms protective body armor. The men in the air called them chicken plates. New business. The contrast was clear. The brass saw essential protection. The gunners saw a heavy bib for cowards that barely covered their vitals. A bullet from the tree line strikes the fuselage. It punches through the aluminum skin. It hits the ceramic plate. The plate shatters, absorbing the energy, or the round deflects into the man's neck. Most gunners threw the plates on the floor to protect their groin from fire coming from below. They chose mobility. They chose the ability to lean out into the wind and swing the M60 without 50 pounds of useless nylon dragging them down. Speed was the only real shield. The crew survived by hitting the landing zone, emptying their belts, and banking hard before the enemy could find their lead. They traded the weight of heavy armor for the chance to fly faster. Armor was heavy, speed was life. But the Pentagon realized that if you can't protect the skin of the helicopter, You have to burn away everything that threatens it. Engineering hysteria took over. Early crews operated like mechanics in a nightmare. They bolted M60 machine guns to swivel mounts in the doorways to fight the vibration. Some went further. They hung machine guns from the ceiling on bungee cords to swing the barrel at any angle. There were no manuals for this. It was raw survival. Why stop at one gun? Engineers started strapping everything they had to the airframe. Rocket pods, grenade launchers, experimental mounts. The UH-1B and UH-1C models emerged as the first true predatory gunships. These weren't transport birds anymore. They carried the M134 minigun. Imagine the heat. The weapon consumed a standard infantry squad's entire ammunition supply in 30 seconds. It spat out 6,000 rounds per minute. Before the war ended, this arms race reached its logical conclusion. The military stopped modifying transport hulls and built a narrow, tandem-seat Predator designed only for killing. In 1967, the U.S. Army deployed the AH-1 Cobra. Even 6,000 rounds per minute mean nothing if the gunner cannot cheat physics. The M60 machine gun was a heavy, vibrating beast. A shotgun rider didn't just pull the trigger, he fought the machine. The helicopter banks hard at 100 knots. The gunner leans into the open door, his boots skidding on the metal floor. How do you hit a shadow in the brush? You don't aim at the target. You aim at the empty space 15 meters ahead of it. Bullets fired from a moving bird carry the aircraft's forward momentum. This is the art of leading. If you aim directly at the muzzle flash in the tree line, your rounds will strike the dirt 50 feet behind it. The vibration is constant. The airframe shudders, telegraphing every piston stroke of the engine into the gunner's shoulders. His fingers go numb from the rhythmic pounding of the spade grips. Hot brass casings fly backward, bouncing off the interior bulkheads and clattering across the deck. He watches the rotor tips. He clears the skids from branches during a hover. He is the eyes of a pilot who is flying blind to his own flanks. But the math of the kill remains the primary burden. Between the speed of the Huey, the wind resistance, and the erratic movement of the enemy below, the hit probability dropped with every passing second. One mistake in the lead and the entire belt disappears into the canopy. Target missed. The math of the jungle was simple. The closer you stood to the open door, the shorter your life became. In the early days, a grim legend circulated among the crews. 5 minutes. That was the rumored life expectancy of a door gunner once the lead started flying. Is it a statistical myth? Perhaps. But in a hot landing zone, survival rates for the man in the well could plummet to 50% in a single sortie. Why were they hit first? The Viet Cong knew the rules. Kill the gunner, and the helicopter is just a loud, defenseless box. Then came the dust-offs. These were the medevac units, the flying ambulances of the bush. By the book, they were supposed to be untouchable. A giant red cross was painted on the nose and doors. They flew unarmed. It was a gentleman's agreement in a war that had no gentlemen. The logic was cynical. The United States used napalm and chemical defoliants. In return, the North Vietnamese ignored the Red Cross. To the enemy, a slowed-down medevac was just a hovering target. The unarmed rule died quickly. Dust-offs began carrying door gunners for basic survival. These men didn't just shoot. When the skids touched the tall grass, the gunner jumped out. He ran into the tree line. He dragged the bleeding and the broken toward the rotors. The cabin was a conveyor belt of meat and iron. On heavy days, the casualties numbered in the dozens. The Huey couldn't take them all. The gunner had to look at a row of shredded bodies and make a choice. He grabbed the man with the sucking chest wound and left the others behind for the next turn. The math of evacuation was cold. If the ground troops were being overrun, the helicopter was the only way out. Sometimes, the chaos of the scramble turned a rescue into a death trap. In the heat of the LZ, door gunners provided the only shield. They poured suppressive fire into the tree line while the skids barely touched the mud. Bullets whizzed through the open cabin. They clattered against the thin aluminum skin like hail. Many gunners kept their fingers on the trigger even after taking a fatal hit. They fired until their lungs collapsed. Then, there was the case of a single mistake. A crew spotted movement and landed to investigate. A young door gunner saw a wounded enemy soldier twitching in the tall grass. He didn't think. He didn't signal. He simply jumped out to retrieve the man. The gunner hoisted the wounded Vietnamese soldier onto his shoulders. He turned back to the LZ. The grass whipped in the rotor wash. He watched the Huey lift off and bank hard into the clouds. His bird was gone. 20 minutes. That is how long he stood there. He had no radio. He had no weapon. He only had a bleeding enemy draped over his neck in the middle of a hostile jungle. Statistically, 20 minutes in an active zone alone meant capture or an execution. He stood in the sudden, heavy silence of the brush. He waited for a muzzle flash. The sound of blades finally returned. The crew had counted heads and realized one was missing. They flared the helicopter into the clearing at maximum speed. The crew chief didn't offer a hand. He leaned out of the door and screamed over the engine roar until his veins bulged. He cursed the gunner for abandoning his post and breaking every protocol in the book. Once they hauled him inside, the crew chief slammed the gunner against the bulkhead in a mix of rage and pure relief. 12-year-old soldiers held rifles in the tree line. This was the reality of the jungle. Children became combatants before they learned to shave. Who is down there? A farmer with a hoe or a soldier with a grenade? From 2,000 feet, you cannot tell. The door gunner had no thermal optics, no night vision, just a pair of eyes and a vibrating machine gun. He scanned the canopy for a muzzle flash or a bent branch. The Viet Cong were masters of the invisible. 1 second of hesitation meant a rocket-propelled grenade in the fuel tank. 1 second of panic meant a dead civilian. By day, he was a peaceful rice farmer. By night, he was a guerrilla laying mines. The contrast was lethal. Gunners fired into the green void, never knowing who they hit. They saw their best friends die in the seat next to them. Blood on the flight suit, the smell of copper in JP-4 fuel. Those who survived physically often died inside before even returning to base. They carried the weight of every split-second decision into old age. This psychological toll created the most traumatized veterans of the entire conflict. The U.S. Army integrated these brutal lessons into the Air-Land Battle Doctrine of 1982.